Sarah Miller had always believed she was finally stepping into the kind of life she had worked so hard to earn. At 24, she was fresh out of nursing school, now employed at St. Mary's Hospital in the small town where she had grown up. Her days were exhausting, her nights irregular, but she found comfort in the fact that she never had to come home to an empty house. John Carter, her boyfriend of 3 years, lived with her. He wasn't ambitious the way Sarah was, but he was dependable, warm, and endlessly patient. He worked nights at a supermarket across town, stacking shelves and driving deliveries. It wasn't glamorous, but Sarah didn't care. In her heart, they were as good as married. Their home was a modest one-story house tucked into the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood. During the day, sunlight streamed in through the windows and warmed the pale wooden floors. At night, the house seemed to shrink into itself, leaving Sarah alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old beams. She had grown used to it. John often teased her about being nervous when she was alone. "Don't worry," he would say with that crooked grin. "No matter what happens, I'll always come back to you." It had sounded romantic at the time, but on one particular night, those words began to echo with a different weight. "No, undoubtedly, and just sharply undone." The night was cold and damp, the kind of night that pressed fog against the windows and made streetlights glow like weak lanterns in a storm. John left for work late, muttering about losing track of time. Sarah leaned on the doorframe as he pulled on his jacket. "You're tired," she said. "You should have taken the earlier shift. This road is awful at night." John kissed her on the forehead, brushing away her concern. "I'll be fine. Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning." The door clicked shut behind him. John's car, a faded silver sedan, hummed down the narrow 2-lane road that cut through the wooded outskirts of town. The wipers squealed against the windshield as drizzle turned to heavier rain. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, humming along to a tune on the radio to keep himself awake. Then something moved. It was quick, darting across the road, a dark figure, human-like but indistinct in the fog. John's heart lurched. He swerved sharply, tires screaming on the slick asphalt. The headlights swung across the trees. The impact came with a violent crunch of metal against wood. Glass exploded. His head slammed forward. For a moment, the world was only the sound of rain and the faint hiss of the dying radio. And then, silence. Wow. At home, Sarah had already changed into her pajamas and curled up on the couch with a medical journal. She was trying to force her tired brain to review a chapter on emergency procedures. The house was quiet, except for the steady ticking of the clock above the TV. Her eyelids were heavy when a sound jolted her back to awareness. Clack, dot. It was the sound of the front door unlocking. Sarah blinked, confused. She hadn't heard a car pull up. She was certain she had locked the door earlier. Slowly, she set her book aside and stood. The hallway stretched dark before her. She padded forward, every step reluctant. And then she saw him. John stood in the open doorway. For a second, Sarah's relief flooded her, but almost instantly it was replaced with dread. His clothes were torn, soaked in something dark. His skin was pale, his lips split and bloodied. Raindrops clung to his hair, and his eyes seemed dull, as though the spark she knew so well had been dimmed. "John!" she gasped, rushing forward. Oh my God, what happened? He stared at her blankly before offering a strange, stilted answer. I fell. Just wanted to come home. His voice was flat, detached. Sarah wrapped her arm around him, guiding him inside. You're hurt. You need to go to the hospital. But John didn't resist, didn't explain. He allowed her to pull him inside, peel off his wet clothes, and hand him a clean shirt and sweatpants. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical. When he was dressed, he didn't head to bed or even the bathroom. He simply walked into the living room, sat heavily on the couch, and turned on the television. The screen buzzed with static. Sarah frowned. The cable must be out again. But John didn't change the channel. He didn't even blink. He stared at the white noise as though it were a program only he could see. The air in the room grew colder. Sarah tugged her sweater tighter around herself and rubbed her arms. She could see her breath misting in the air, though the heater hummed softly in the background. She sat beside John cautiously. John, are you sure you're okay? You're scaring me. No answer. Only the faint rise and fall of his chest, as though each breath was an effort. Then he made a noise. A low, guttural rasp. Dot. It wasn't a cough. It wasn't even human. Sarah's skin prickled. Her eyes darted to the TV screen again. For a split second, she thought she saw his reflection in the static. His face twisted into an impossible grin, eyes hollow and black. She blinked, and it was gone. Her throat tightened. John, she whispered. He turned his head toward her, but his lips never moved. His eyes seemed to smile, though his face remained expressionless. Fear washed through her chest. She rose quickly, muttering, I'll get you some water. The phone rang. Its shrill tone shattered the suffocating silence. Sarah jumped, clutching her chest. She hurried to the kitchen, snatched the receiver, and pressed it to her ear. Miss Miller, a man's voice said. This is Officer Daniels with the county police. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your boyfriend, John Carter, was in an accident tonight. His car hit a tree. He didn't make it. His body has been transferred to St. Mary's Hospital morgue. Sarah's vision blurred. The phone slipped against her cheek. What? She breathed. Her eyes slowly turned toward the living room doorway. Through the gap, she could see John, still sitting on the couch, still staring at the static screen. He was smiling. The voice on the phone repeated her name, but Sarah barely heard it. Her hands trembled as she lowered the receiver. Her knees buckled, and she staggered back against the wall. The realization crashed down on her. Whoever, whatever was in her living room, it wasn't John. Her heart hammered so loudly it drowned out the ticking clock. She locked herself in the bedroom, every nerve screaming with panic. She pressed her ear to the door, but no sound came from the living room, only silence. After what felt like an eternity, she gathered the courage to peek out. The couch was empty. The TV was off. John was gone. Sarah's entire body shook as she grabbed her car keys. She had to get to the hospital. She had to see for herself. And yet, even as she stepped into the night, she swore she could still hear his voice, faint and lingering in her ear. Didn't I tell you? No matter what happens, I'll always come back to you. The night air outside was damp and heavy, clinging to Sarah's skin as she rushed to her car. Her hands shook so badly she dropped her keys twice before sliding into the driver's seat. The streets were nearly empty. The only sound was the engine's steady rumble and the thud of her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to move, stretching and shifting in the dim glow of the headlights. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. He's gone, she told herself. That wasn't him. It couldn't have been him. But the memory of John's pale smile in the glow of the TV gnawed at her. The way the air had chilled, the guttural noise from his throat, the impossible reflection in the screen. Sarah blinked hard, trying to focus on the road. That was when she saw it. A figure. Someone was standing at the roadside, barely visible in the fog. At first, she thought it might be a lost traveler. Against her better judgment, she slowed the car. The headlights slid over the figure, revealing the face. Her blood ran cold. It was John. His skin was gray and torn. Blood streaked down his temple and soaked his shirt. His mouth twisted into something between a grimace and a smile. His hand lifted weakly, beckoning her. Sarah. His voice rasped, cracked, and inhuman. Help me. Take me home. Sarah screamed, stomping on the accelerator. The car roared forward, but the voice didn't fade. It grew louder. It surrounded her. Sarah, Sarah, help me. She clutched the wheel, tears blurring her vision. But the voice pressed on, now inside the car itself, as though John sat beside her, behind her, everywhere at once. Sarah, I'm cold. Sarah, don't leave me. Sarah. Her sobs turned to gasps as panic overtook her. She swerved, tires screeching. The headlights caught the silver curve of the guardrail too late. Crash! Metal shrieked. Glass shattered. The world spun. Darkness swallowed everything. Sarah woke to the beeping of monitors. The antiseptic sting of a hospital ward filled her nose. Her head throbbed, her body bruised. Beside her bed sat Officer Daniels, the same voice she had heard on the phone. His uniform looked too sharp for such a weary face. You're safe now, he said softly. You were lucky. A passerby found you early this morning. Sarah's lips trembled. It wasn't luck. John, he came back. He was here. He was in my house, in my car. Her voice broke. Daniels frowned, his brow creasing with the restrained patience of a man used to grief. Miss Miller, I know this is hard, but John died in that accident. Sometimes the mind plays tricks when... No, Sarah snapped, tears streaking down her face. I saw him. I heard him. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. Her hands shook as she clutched at the sheets. Daniels didn't argue further. Instead, after a moment's silence, he said gently, "Would you like to see him? Sometimes." The corridors of the hospital seemed colder than usual as Sarah followed Daniels into the basement level. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting shadows that stretched too far. A coroner pulled back the sheet. There lay John. His skin was pale, his body broken yet unmistakably lifeless. His eyes were closed, his mouth slack. The stillness of him was worse than any horror she had seen. Sarah crumpled against the gurney, sobbing. She reached for his hand, but it was icy and stiff beneath her touch. There was no warmth left in him. For the first time since the nightmare began, she believed, truly believed, that he was gone. Nay, oh. That night, Sarah returned to her empty house. She was too numb to notice the shadows clinging heavier to the corners, too exhausted to care that the ticking of the clock seemed slightly off, too slow. She collapsed into bed, her mind replaying the image of John's face in the morgue. At midnight, the clock struck 12. Knock, 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 ah. Her eyes shot open. She lay frozen, the blankets pulled tight to her chin, her ears strained in the silence. Then came the voice, a whisper, raspy and hollow, seeping through the door like smoke. Sarah. Her heart hammered. Sarah, open the door. Help me. Tears welled in her eyes. She clamped her hands over her mouth to keep from screaming. The voice grew stronger, more insistent, more desperate. Didn't I tell you? No matter what happens, I'll always come back to you. The knocking resumed, slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty house. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah slid off the bed, her legs trembling as she crept toward the door. Each step felt like a choice she couldn't undo. Her hand hovered over the knob. The air was freezing, each breath clouding before her lips. On the other side, the voice whispered again, so close she could almost feel his lips at her ear. Sarah! She shut her eyes, tears streaming down her face. And the house went silent. Nah. My name is John, and I used to be an Uber Eats driver. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. On a frigid night, with heavy snow blanketing the streets, my phone screen flickered. A new order. The address was in a remote, secluded area, and the payout was double the usual fare. Just one more, I told myself, and then I'll go home. It wasn't just my last delivery. I drove through the snowy darkness, the only car on the desolate roads. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a large, dilapidated mansion. It stood isolated among bare, skeletal trees. A chilling feeling, not from the cold, but from something unseen, seeped into my bones. I saw a yellowed piece of paper taped to the front door. Scrawled in what looked like dried blood were the words, "Do not knock. Leave the order at the garage gate. Do not look back. Leave immediately." I shivered but followed the instructions. As I placed the order at the garage, a man emerged from the shadows. He wore a dark coat and a hood that hid his face. He pointed to the package, then lunged and grabbed my wrist. "Follow me," he commanded. His hand was freezing, an icy grip that sent a jolt of terror through me. I pulled away and ran, not daring to look back. I jumped into my car and sped off, my heart pounding in my chest. I called the police immediately. They met me at the scene. After a brief investigation, an officer turned to me, his voice low. "That house has been abandoned for decades," he said. There was a brutal murder there many years ago. A family was killed, and the perpetrator was never found. A mix of fear and curiosity welled up inside me. I had to go back. I needed to know the truth. It was an unexplainable pull, as if an invisible thread was drawing me back to that haunted house. I returned at midnight. Moonlight illuminated the shattered windows, like the empty eyes of a sleeping monster. I walked in, my footsteps echoing on the creaking wooden floorboards. The house wasn't a typical ruin. Things were strewn about, chairs were overturned. The front door slammed shut behind me. Then, a loud thud. A window I hadn't noticed was open suddenly slammed shut. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. From upstairs, I heard heavy footsteps. I spun around, but no one was there. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped right behind me. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I ran into another room, where a dried blood stain was on the wall. I shined my light on it, and words appeared as if written just moments before. Find the truth. Suddenly, an old television in the corner flickered to life. The screen was dark, then displayed the family photo from before. Their faces were distorted, their eyes pure white. In a panic, I turned to run, but the door was locked. Despair washed over me. The spirits of the murdered family appeared before me. They stared at me with empty, soulless eyes. A chilling whisper echoed through the room. A rope descended from the ceiling, and a noose tightened around my neck. I struggled, but it was no use. My flashlight fell from my hand, the final light of my life extinguishing as I collapsed to the floor. The next morning, my Uber car was found parked outside the mansion. But I was gone forever. No one knows what happened to me that night, or why I never returned. They say Christmas is a time for miracles, for warmth and togetherness. But for me, this Christmas was a curse. While my roommate was at a party, I chose to stay home. The loneliness on Christmas Eve should have been sad, but instead, it sent a shiver down my spine. To escape the feeling, I put on my coat and walked outside. Snow fell softly, blanketing the deserted streets. I went to the nearby park, where I saw a figure sitting silently on a bench. He was hunched over, his head hidden by a hood. He had no expression, no life in him, just a terrifying stillness. I just wanted to go home. But I didn't know that from that moment, he was following me. And Christmas Eve would become the worst nightmare of my life. When I got back to my apartment, I saw him standing right in front of the door. With no expression on his face, he just stared at me. Panicked, I rushed inside, slammed the door shut and locked it. My heart was pounding, but when I looked through the window, he was gone. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. I tried to calm myself, pulling out my phone to call the police. As I was talking, I looked out the window. He was still there, but this time, his face wasn't human. It was a featureless, black void. He picked up a stone and threw it hard at the window. The glass cracked. He kept throwing stones, each blow a dagger aimed at my sanity. He finally shattered the glass, and a boneless arm reached inside, gliding across the broken surface to write a message in the condensation. "I'm already inside." I screamed and backed away. The police arrived, but they found no one. They looked at me with pity, saying I must have been frightened. They left, leaving me utterly alone with my fear. I sat in my room, staring at the shattered window. Suddenly, a soft knock echoed through the silence. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from my bedroom door. I crept toward it, but no one was there. I went back to my desk, but the knocking returned, this time from inside my closet. I knew something was in the room with me. I bolted out of the room, running down the stairs. A cold hiss filled the air. I turned back and saw the faceless face. No eyes, no nose, just a wide, gaping mouth, staring at me through the window. "Follow me," a raspy voice whispered. It wasn't a sound, but a frequency trying to possess my mind. I screamed, a guttural sound of pure terror, and collapsed to the floor. The next morning, I was found in a state of catatonic shock. I was curled up in the corner, still clutching my phone. I couldn't speak, just stared blankly into space. The police returned. They found deep claw marks on the wall, but the shattered window was back to normal. Everything was as it was. I never returned to college. The horror of that Christmas Eve has stayed with me forever. The faceless man didn't kill me. He possessed my soul, leaving me an empty shell, just like him. And my story became a warning. Never be alone. And never believe what you see, because there are things that exist that you can't touch. Eerie, it's for all. I do. The rain had just stopped when Ethan and Claire arrived at the countryside house. The road behind them glistened in the moonlight, wet and silent, and the woods surrounding the property stood eerily still, as if holding their breath. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, an escape from the noise of the city, a short getaway to spend time together before life pulled them back into its endless routines. Ethan was the adventurous one, his restless curiosity often pushing him into situations Claire would rather avoid. To him, old places like this house were mysteries waiting to be uncovered, stories carved into the wood and stone. Claire, however, was the cautious soul. Sensitive to her surroundings, she often picked up on feelings or details that Ethan overlooked. Where he saw charm, she sensed shadows. The house looked older than it had in the photos. Its paint was faded, its windows cloudy with age, and the air that greeted them inside was colder than the rain-soaked night. Dust lingered in the hallways, and each step across the wooden floors gave off a faint, tired groan. "Not exactly 5 stars," Ethan joked, tossing his bag onto a couch. His voice carried through the empty rooms, echoing faintly like the house was whispering back. Claire forced a smile, but her eyes wandered uneasily. Something about the silence unsettled her. It was the kind that pressed against the ears, making her feel like the house itself was listening. They carried their things upstairs to the bedroom. That was when they saw it. Against the far wall stood a tall mirror, framed in tarnished silver. Its glass cracked faintly along the edges. A thin sheet of dust veiled its surface, yet their reflections shone through clear and sharp. Too sharp. Neither of them noticed as they set down their bags and laughed off the creaks of the old house. That for a brief moment, just a flicker, their reflections didn't move when they did. The house was larger than they expected, yet it felt empty in a way that wasn't comforting. The ground floor stretched out in narrow hallways, leading to rooms that smelled faintly of mildew and dust. The kitchen looked abandoned, its wooden cupboards swollen from years of dampness, and the dining room still held a long table covered with a yellowed lace cloth. The furniture seemed frozen in time, as if the last guests had walked out decades ago and never returned. Upstairs, the bedrooms were simple, bare floors, faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. and that looming mirror in the largest room. It stood almost as tall as the ceiling, like a silent guardian watching over the space. Claire brushed her fingers along the cracked silver frame and shivered. "Feels colder here," she whispered. Ethan laughed it off. "Old houses always have drafts. It's just air seeping in." He grinned at her reflection. "Besides, now we've got an antique mirror thrown in for free." That night, after settling in, the house began to show its true self. The lights flickered faintly, as if struggling to stay alive. The air inside grew heavier, colder than the night outside. When Claire walked past the mirror before bed, she froze. For a split second, she thought she saw Ethan's reflection still standing in front of it, smiling, while the real Ethan was already lying down on the bed behind her. Her breath caught, but when she blinked, the reflection was normal again. She told herself it was exhaustion. Later, as the couple tried to sleep, faint creaking echoed down the hall, steady, deliberate, like footsteps pacing slowly across the wooden floor. Ethan sat up, listening. "Must be the house settling," he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Claire clutched the blanket tighter. In the corner of the room, the mirror gleamed faintly, reflecting nothing but the dark. "Nine-oh." The nights inside the house only grew stranger. Each evening, the mirror seemed to pull their attention, its surface always gleaming faintly, even in darkness, as though it had its own source of light. On the second night, Claire awoke to a sound like faint tapping. She turned her head and froze. The mirror was no longer reflecting the room. Instead, it showed a dim hallway that stretched endlessly, darker than anything inside the house. At the far end, a figure stood motionless, its pale face blurred like smeared paint. She blinked, and the reflection was normal again. Ethan, half asleep, brushed it off. "Dreams feel real sometimes. Don't scare yourself." But by the third night, even Ethan couldn't deny it. As he passed by the mirror, he stopped. His reflection had stayed behind. It grinned, wide and unnatural, even as Ethan's real face froze in shock. Then, with a blink, the reflection snapped back into sync. He stumbled back, laughing nervously. "Must be a trick of the glass." Claire's voice trembled. "No, Ethan, it's not the glass. Something's inside." That evening, the house came alive. Doors creaked open on their own. Shadows moved across the walls, without source. Whispers leaked through the hallways, soft and taunting, like laughter carried through the air. The mirror became the center of it all, its surface rippling faintly, as if it were water waiting to be touched. Drawn by both fear and fascination, Ethan couldn't stay away. Claire begged him to leave it alone, but he stepped closer, eyes locked on the shifting reflection. In the glass, the pale figure was back. This time clearer, with hollow eyes, and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. Its hand pressed against the other side of the mirror, and Ethan, trembling, lifted his own to match it. The surface of the mirror shuddered, then gave way like liquid. A skeletal hand shot out, clamping around Ethan's wrist. "Ethan!" Claire screamed, pulling at him. But the grip was too strong. With a violent jerk, Ethan was yanked forward, half his body disappearing into the glass. His eyes widened in terror as he cried out her name, and then, with one last desperate tug, the mirror swallowed him whole. Claire fell to the floor, sobbing, staring at her own reflection. Only this time, Ethan was still there, his face pressed against the inside of the glass. pounding silently, his mouth forming words she couldn't hear. Behind him, the pale figure wrapped its arms around him, dragging him deeper into the endless darkness. She ran, down the stairs, through the front door, into the cold night air. Her footsteps pounded against the dirt road until the house was nothing but a shadow behind her. Claire survived, but survival brought no peace. Days later, safe in her own apartment, she caught herself staring at her bathroom mirror. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw Ethan's face staring back at her from the other side, lips moving soundlessly, eyes filled with the same desperate plea as before. She turned away, trembling, but deep down she knew. Ethan was still there, trapped forever, and the mirror would never stop watching her. Wah! Shuck! Weeks passed, but Claire never found peace. She avoided mirrors as much as she could, covering them with sheets, turning them to face the wall. But glass was everywhere. Windows, reflections in water, even the screen of her phone at night. Sometimes she thought she saw Ethan's eyes staring back. One morning, scrolling through the news, she froze. An article headline read, "Couple vanishes in countryside house. Only one returns." The photo showed the very house they had rented. Police tape stretched across the front. The article mentioned strange reports from locals about figures in the windows and a mirror that doesn't reflect properly. Claire slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. The reflection in the black screen lingered just a second too long. Ethan was smiling. Yee.
Dr. Eleanor Vance. I'm 32, former caregiver. Now, missing, or so the reports say. But I'm not gone. Not exactly. Hill House remembers. I never belonged anywhere. Not to my family, not to the world. But one day a letter arrived from a man named Dr. Montague, a scholar of the paranormal. He wrote, "You are invited to Hill House. You've experienced phenomena. We seek to understand it. Understand it. As if it could be parsed like grammar. As if dread obeyed punctuation." I said yes. Hill House didn't welcome. It observed. It was wrong in all the right ways. Every angle slightly off. Doors that shut by themselves. Walls that whispered in drafts. It felt sentient, not haunted, but constructed to haunt. There were 4 of us. The doctor, the laughing heir, Luke, the bright, dazzling Theodora, and me. They didn't know how breakable I was, but Hill House did. The first night pounding on the walls, like fists demanding entry. But the halls were empty. The second, words appeared on my wall. "Help Eleanor come home," written in chalk. A child's hand, but no one confessed. No one else seemed afraid. Theodora laughed. "How sweet," she said. But I wasn't amused. I heard the syntax of possession in those 5 words. Not plea, command. Hill House was speaking to me. By day, I wandered the house. I listened. Its creaks formed patterns. Its silences had intonation. Hill House didn't scream. It suggested. And I began to suggest things, too. That Theodora hated me. That Luke mocked me. That the doctor never intended to let me leave. I started talking to the house. At first, quietly. Then aloud. Then only to the house. One night, I woke to laughter down the hall. Then silence. Then a child sobbing right beside my bed. No one was there, but my hand was being held. It took me hours to unclench my fingers. They were ice cold. I told the others. They said I'd imagined it. But the house knew. And that night it wrote again. Home. Theodora moved her things out of my room. Luke avoided my gaze. Even the doctor began asking if I was sleeping, if I was... Well, I laughed. Too loudly. Of course I was well. Hill House was the first place I had ever been seen. It heard me, and I heard it. Its architecture matched the blueprint of my mind. Rooms without exit, stairs that turned in on themselves, echoes that spoke first. They told me I had to leave, that the house was affecting me. I agreed. I packed. I smiled. And in the night, I took the car, but I didn't drive away. I drove in circles on the winding path outside Hill House, again and again, until the wheels left the gravel, until the trees rushed toward me. A whisper right before the crash. Stay he epilogue. They buried my body, said it was suicide, said I was unwell, but they don't understand language, not like I do. Hill House spoke to me. It still does. Now I walk its halls, my footsteps soft against ancient wood. Doors close behind me, not in malice, but greeting. I write messages on walls for the next girl, the next misfit, the next lonely soul who just wants to be heard. I am Eleanor, and this is my sentence. Hill House speaks, and I am its voice. Evelyn Vale. I'm 27, formerly a governess, currently a patient. But I wasn't always this way. It began with a letter, handwritten, wax-sealed, elegant. A wealthy gentleman required someone discreet, educated, and trustworthy to care for 2 orphaned children at his country estate. Bly. 2 children, Flora and Miles. Perfect angels, the uncle said, but their care is entirely yours. I'm never to be contacted. Ever. I should have walked away. But I needed the cheer. Bly was beautiful, but too quiet. I remember my first morning, sunlight pouring across stone floors, the silence holding its breath. Flora was cheerful, dainty, bright-eyed, but oddly rehearsed. Miles had just returned from school, dismissed for unspecified reasons. He was charming, too charming, the kind that knows your boundaries before you speak them. And always that same phrase from them both. We're ever so happy you're here. Too happy. Too identical in tone, like they'd practiced it. It started on the 3rd evening. I looked up from the garden and saw a man at the tower, tall, pale, watching. I asked Mrs. Gross, the housekeeper. Her face fell. "Mr. Quint," she whispered, "but that's not possible. He died a fall on the ice months ago, but I saw him again the next night, closer, through the window. And Flora, who had been playing alone, was staring at him too. When I asked her who it was, she smiled. Nobody. Miss Jessel, Flora's old governess, also dead. Suicide in the lake. I began to keep notes, verbal cues, repeated phrases. Flora's syntax shifted when she mentioned Jessel. Her words mimicked older rhythms. Miles, too. His speech became layered with effect. Phrases a boy his age wouldn't know. Latin, legalese, things Quint might have said. I confronted them. They denied it all. But one night I found Miles whispering to the empty fireplace, not in English, in perfect mimicry of Quint's voice. Mrs. Gross said I was exhausted. That grief had softened my reason. But I know psycholinguistic corruption. I've studied how language encodes trauma, how children echo what they've heard in ways adults miss. These children weren't haunted, they were mirroring, repeating words not their own, smiling like puppets. And then I saw Miss Jessel, soaked, crying at Flora's bedside. Flora was asleep, but her lips moved, whispering syllables I couldn't decipher. And Miles began sleepwalking. I told myself I could protect them, shield them, so I watched. Every night, I followed the whispering, listened at doors. Then one dawn, Miles vanished. I found him in the schoolroom, standing alone, smiling, pale. "Is he here?" I asked. He nodded. "He's inside." And he tapped his own chest. I begged him to fight, to say something that was truly his. He looked up, eyes wide, lips parted. but the words that came out were not his voice. He died in my arms. No wound, no sign of struggle, just stopped breathing like a candle snuffed. Flora wouldn't look at me. Mrs. Gross took her away. I was left alone in Bly. The children were gone. The ghosts were gone. But the language remained. Words etched into the walls in invisible ink. Voices in my sleep speaking in Miles's tone, repeating that final whisper. He's inside. Now when I speak, sometimes it's in a voice not my own. When I write, my handwriting changes. I know what people say, that I lost my mind, that I killed a boy out of hysteria. But I was a linguist, a psychologist. I know possession when I see it. And sometimes it doesn't take demons or ghosts. Sometimes it's a sentence, a phrase repeated too many times. A child learning the wrong lesson. And Bly is still there, empty, waiting, with a mirror in the tower, and two shadows that never left the lake. If you go there, don't speak to the children, especially if they smile and say, "We're ever so happy you're here."